Go ahead. You can start.
Thanks. Well, hello and welcome everyone. I'm Veronica Morris and I'm a member of the Bretzfelder Memorial Park Committee. I'm there as the representative from the town of Bethlehem, where I'm also a selectman. And thank you so much for joining us for this, which is our fourth and final lecture series for the wintertime Bretzfelder Park series. For those of you who haven't had a chance to make it up to the park, it is a wonderful little treasure trove, and we actually see all kinds of wonderful wildlife there, including I see black bears crossing all the time, especially going back and forth over the road between the town forest and Bretzfelder that's right across the street. But Bretzfelder gets its name from Mr. Bretzfelder, who loved one of the trees there so much, this 200-year-old white pine, that he bought the land that it stands on. And then when it was under threat from a nearby tree that fell and crashed into it, he hired in the 1920s tree surgeons to patch his special trees wounds, remove any dead branches, install fancy stuff. And you can see some of that remaining work today as it continues to soar much higher than the other trees around it. And that's Mr. Bretzfelder's final resting place. His family for years hired keepers of the tree. And in 1979, Mr. Bretzfelder's daughter, Helen, bequeathed the tree and the surrounding acreage to the Forest Society as Memorial Park to be managed by the Forest Society and the town jointly. And the Forest Society increased that by adding the land around the tree as well, so that it's now a total of 77 acres that's maintained as a community park and natural history resource. And tonight we're honored to have Andrew Timmins from New Hampshire Fish and Game. He's been with Fish and Game for 28 years, where he has now accepted the role as Game Programs Supervisor. For those of you who read the Fish and Game Wildlife magazine, you'll have seen his name for years around black bears, some of our other fur bears, and he pops up on non-game stuff as well, because he's been the bear biologist since 2002. But he's worked on a ton of field biology and helps communities, including Bethlehem, on managing our bear population and minimizing our bears and human conflict. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Andrew.
Okay. I'd like to share my screen, and when I click on it, it says host disabled, attendee screen sharing.
Hang on, Tina will probably click the button. There you go.
Sorry about that. I forgot to make you a co-host. You should be all set now.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Can folks see that?
No, not yet.
Okay. I had a suspicion that was going to be the case. How about now? Probably not.
No.
No, still.
Any suggestions?
And the share screen's not working.
So, yeah, so the share button is kind of faded out and it doesn't want to let me select it. Choose what to share. It says entire screen window, Microsoft Edge tab.
Can you email it to me and I can see if I can share it?
Let me try.
Is it open on your desktop?
It's minimized. Yeah, it's open, but it's minimized down the bottom.
Oh.
Yeah, try opening it fully and then try doing it.
Okay.
It has to be totally open on your desktop before you click the share. So you might want to unshare.
Yep.
Right.
Okay, I'll hit cancel. And then I'll bring it up. Is
There you
that any
go.
better?
Yeah,
Oh,
perfect.
okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Well, sorry about the technical difficulties on my end, but thanks for the invite tonight. And can folks still hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so for some reason, I'd like to be able to also see, so right now I can see just my presentation. I'd like to be able to see the audience. Is that an option?
Yes, go up to the top where it says view in the black part at the very top right
Okay,
and push that and you'll see some choices. Gallery side by side, speaker. Try gallery side by side.
Andrew, I think she means up in the upper right-hand corner,
Yeah, I do.
like all the way up.
Out of your presentation, all the way up on the right corner of your computer.
up here.
It says view.
So I have a view here. And it has presentation view, master views.
No, further out.
Okay,
Right next to the edge of your computer screen. High up. Not in your presentation.
right.
Your cursor's still inside your presentation.
So on mine, it's up at the top next to where you close out or minimize.
No, higher than that.
Huh, I can't seem to get up there.
Oh,
Well, I'll just go with it. Once in a while, I may just ask and make sure everybody's still hearing me. What I'll do is take my phone number, and if all of a sudden I blank out, someone can text me or call me.
okay.
It's 603-991-8715. Okay. So again, apologize for the technical issues. So thanks for the invite. Anytime I'm asked to do a bear presentation in advance, I always try to plan it for March, April, because that's always kind of just before the time when bears start getting active on the landscape. And it's always an ideal time to try to, increase public awareness of bears and to remind people how to coexist with bears. So tonight I'm gonna kind of give a snapshot overview of the department's bear management program, and I'll focus on a couple different aspects of it, including population management. But I'm really going to spend most of my time talking about conflict situations and mitigating conflicts between bears and humans, because that's what modern day bear management is. And it doesn't matter if it's in New Hampshire or Vermont or South Carolina, bear populations and human populations have both grown, and they're competing for space. And as a result, we run into issues with conflicts between the two. So from a population perspective, it's the department's job to manage bear populations, and our role is to kind of set sideboards on what population levels should be in terms of minimum viable populations, or an upper sideboard of when a bear population would exceed biological carrying capacity. But the reality of it is, bears, as well as all wildlife, they don't belong to the department. They don't belong to me. They belong to the public. Every every member of the public has ownership in wildlife. So it is our role to manage these populations at levels that are basically selected by the public. And we have various ways of determining what those levels are. In New Hampshire, we manage bears across 6 management regions. And I'll get into what densities are for each of these regions, but these regions are developed based on similarities in both bear habitat as well as bear abundance. So for each one of these regions, we manipulate the hunting seasons at these regional levels in order to meet our population objectives. So this graph shows the estimated bear population, over the past couple decades, going back to 1995, and that's indicated by the green line with the black marks on the green line. What the red line indicates is what the population goal was during different periods of time, and you can see that they've been different
Andrew,
over. Yeah.
Andrew, I'm going to interfere unless other people are seeing. Their slides are not changing.
Oh.
So we still see that beautiful black bear, but nothing's happening. So you need to advance your slides.
Okay, so you're not seeing a graphic right now.
Not yet.
Okay. Stand by. I'm going to get somebody who's a little more technical savvy than myself.
I think if you just use those little arrows at the bottom, it should do it.
So
There you go.
maybe it's all right. So I had it in slideshow view, but it doesn't sound like. So right now, can you see the whole? Are you seeing the whole slide or?
I see sort of 3/4 of the slide. State bear population in New Hampshire, 1995.
21. Okay.
Okay.
Is that what everybody sees? Okay, so as I mentioned, the green that green line that's shown increase over time is the estimated bear population in those given years. What the red line represents is the population goal, and you can see that it's changed over time. And we manage wildlife using management plans that typically span a period of about 10 years. So you can see the first management plan that was in place back in the 90s had a population goal of a little over 3,000 bears. And then, the next 10-year plan, the population goal was increased to 5,000. And the current plan, which began in 2016, was the first time in the state's history where the goal was actually lowered by the public. And that was mostly due to concerns over an expanding human population and development in the lakes regions, running from the lakes regions to the Maine border. So as a result of that, the statewide goal was reduced. So prior to that plan being put in place, we were above goal, but not significantly or not terribly above goal. But then since that time, since 2016, we've had a reduction in the goal, but at the same time, we've experienced growth in the population. So now we're in the situation where we have about 6,800 bears statewide, but the population objective is a little under 5,000. So, we're seeing a greater span between the two, and we've been working on trying to reduce that. So of those 6 bear management regions that I mentioned, it's basically split 50-50. Half the regions are at goal, half the regions are above goal, but the area of the state where we're above goal, the largest is in the White Mountains in the central region. So the way we control bear population growth, the only means that we really have to our disposal proposal is the use of recreational bear hunting. So bears, just like turkeys, like deer, like a host of species, um, we rely on hunter harvest and people's use of that resource in order to increase harvest mortality on that population so that the population levels do not grow out of control. You know, in the absence of bear hunting, we would see bear populations quickly grow to the point where they certainly would exceed social carrying capacity, and there's a chance they could even start to exceed a biological carrying capacity. And what we see over time, as bear populations have grown, we have seen an increase in bear harvest. And this reflects, one, that there's more bears on the landscape available to hunters, but also there's a growing interest in hunting bears. You know, when I first took on the bear position back in 2002, our harvest was, we had never hit 600. I remember in 2003 when our harvest first went to 800, we actually shut the season down about 2 weeks early because we were concerned of overharvest. But over time, we've learned that, you know, we really require these elevated harvests in some years in order to reach our objectives. So, you know, it's become the norm, and now we're taking over 1,000 bears annually. And even with that level of harvest, we're still seeing population growth in some regions that is above the desired level. But there's another thing going on. You know, our harvest on bears has increased considerably in the 20 years that I've been the project leader. And despite this growing harvest, there are times and there are certain areas of the state where it doesn't seem like we're necessarily having a huge impact on the total number of bears. So that has caused us to look at some other data. And one thing we have definitely noticed is on any given year, we're seeing an increasing number of females having cubs. There's still this annual fluctuation that occurs. Some of that's, you know, so for those of you who aren't aware, a female bear gives birth to cubs every other year. They breed in the summertime, and they birth cubs in mid-January, and those cubs stay with that female for about 18 months. So as a result of that investment that females make into young, it sets them on this every other year cycle. But the other thing that's playing a role here is annual food abundance really has an impact on the successful reproduction of cubs. So it's natural to have this every other year phenomenon that occurs. But what we've noticed, and it's indicated by the pink line, that over time we've seen increasing number of females in any given year giving birth. We have not seen any change in the age of first reproduction. Female bears tend to start having cubs at age 3.5 in New Hampshire, or at least a percentage of them do. And by 5.5 years of age, most females have produced their first litter. So that hasn't really changed over time. But something's going on here, and we have some suspicions. And my suspicion is that the amount of human-related foods that are available on the landscape may be increasing the reproductive rate of our bear population. We hope to dive into this deeper with some research in the near future, but there's something going on here, and I think it's important we try to tease it out. But now I'm going to switch gears and kind of talk about, you know, just this notion of managing bears on a landscape. You know, we manage bears for the public that has highly varied opinion of bears, and your opinion of wildlife is really based on your value system. Generally, people have higher tolerance or higher appreciation for some of our larger herbivores, species such as deer or moose, but we tend to see kind of lower tolerance and lower opinions towards some of these species that would be considered predators, and that comes in. There's a lot of reasons for that. You know, if you grew up raising livestock and you lost livestock to coyotes or bobcat or bear, you know, over time that can have an impact on your value system. So, you know, our ability to encourage people to be responsible, which is really the key to minimizing conflicts with bears and other wildlife, really depends on their willingness, which is directly related to their values. And we see a wide range of opinions towards bears in the state of New Hampshire. There are people that love bears to the point where they feed bears, and there's people that frankly despise bears. This X-ray is from a orphan cub that we picked up a few years ago. It was late fall, early winter. It was a very small cub we picked up, and it subsequently died. And upon investigation, that little dot that you see at the end of the arrow there is a BB lodged in that animal near its lungs. And you know, somebody shot this bear with a pellet gun or a BB gun, which is just really an inappropriate thing to do. You know, a wide range of opinions towards these animals. So as I mentioned early on in the talk, managing conflicts between, you know, our ability to maintain bears on the landscape in New Hampshire moving forward is really going to hinge on our ability to, you know, keep bears at a socially acceptable level. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we collectively work to mitigate conflicts between bears and humans. And we can do it. It just takes some hard work. So I'll talk about conflict trends in New Hampshire. We have seen conflicts, you know, during the early 90s. Conflicts were on the rise in the state of New Hampshire, and it's no surprise, you know, our bear population was growing at that time. People were not familiar with bears. Bears were, I don't know if novel is the right word, but you know, bear populations were relatively low during the 70s and the 80s, and we began to see the rebound in the early 90s. So people were learning how to live with bears. Since that time, you can see what, you know, you can see what trends have done. Now, there's a couple ways to look at this. You know, yeah, we have these high years every once in a while, but to me, I almost see some stability over time. And also, for the most part, the average number of complaints in any given year over the last 5 years isn't necessarily a lot different than the levels that we saw back in the early 90s, but there's some real differences in both the number of bears and the number of people. Back in this period of time, we had about 2,500 to 3,000 bears in the state. During this period, we have 6,500 to 6,800 bears, so easily double the number of bears. And the human population, I think the last number I saw was around 1.2 million people in the state of New Hampshire. I don't recall what it was back at this time, but it was considerably lower. So, you know, we have more people, more bears, but we don't necessarily have more complaints. And the reason is targeted efforts to try to educate people about bears and increase awareness of bears. I meant to mention it earlier, but if you recall looking at the harvest graphic, you know, you notice this, it always seems to be a boom or bust situation when you're talking about bear conflict levels or bear harvest levels. You know, there's, you know, you can have a low number one year followed by a high the following year. And that's because the vulnerability of bears to both harvest as well as getting into conflicts is really related to natural food abundance. You know, if bears had their preference, they would be feeding on high quality natural foods in the forest where they have cover. And when we have those abundant food years, we certainly see that to some extent. But when Mother Nature doesn't provide those resources, bears know how to supplement. I'm going to show you this video. Hopefully that's playing okay for you.
Yeah.
If I do that, the slides don't advance. They can't see my slides. So that was a video taken by a doorbell cam in Bretton Woods a few summers back, and that was a female bear with her cubs, and it really speaks to the level of comfort that these animals develop in densely occupied areas with a lot of people, and that's because they're getting easy food, and bears can really learn to adjust and adapt and really benefit from that type of situation. When I see that bear, there's nothing aggressive about that bear's behavior. However, people who haven't spent a lot of time around bears or don't know a lot of bears are, understandably going to be freaked out by a bear, putting its front paws up on the window of a house. But what happened in this situation is, over the course of about 2 summers, this particular bear ended up going into about 60 of these condominiums over there. And, she wouldn't break windows, but if a window was open a little bit, she'd peel the window open and climb in and rummage through the kitchen looking for food. And, when that behavior develops, it can be a very hard behavior to break in bears. And, that puts us as managers in very difficult situations. And it's not what we prefer to do, but we unfortunately are forced to trap and destroy bears when they form that behavior that become emboldened. We used to trap and relocate more bears than we do now, but frankly, it's just not an effective way to resolve these issues. And I don't believe trapping and destroying these bears is an effective way either, but unfortunately it puts us in a situation where some of these animals, that's what we have to do. So I want to talk about causes of bear-human conflicts. So really it's an eating machine. It can be described as a stomach with 4 legs. They're very food motivated animals. When they come out of their den in early spring, food availability is very low. They've depleted a lot of their fat reserves over winter. They're lean, they're hungry. And we don't start seeing good quality food on the landscape until summertime. So these bears in spring are pretty desperate, frankly, looking for high quality food. And then on the other side, by fall, these bears need to be packing on substantial body weight in order to survive the denning period, or to have the resources to hibernate or go into a state of torpor for several months. And female bears need to put on about 50% of their body weight in fat in order to successfully support the reproductive process that's occurring from November through January, when those cubs are born, and then subsequently in order to produce enough milk to feed those cubs. So, bears are very dependent on food because their survival and their reproductive success is really directly dependent on having good body fat. And in our world, when the conditions are right, Mother Nature provides a lot of food. But the problem with this is, we can't always rely on this. There are some summers where berry crops do very well. Then we get summers like we had last year, where you get really dry, droughty conditions. where those summer food crops simply don't develop. And it's in those years we see these real spikes in bear-human conflicts. And the same can be said for some of these fall mast sources of food. You know, beech nuts historically were a crop that produced good crops about every other year, but in more recent times, we're lucky if we get a good beech nut crop at once every 6 years or so. Oak tends to be a little more consistent crop, but in the more northern part of the state, oak is just not well dispersed and well distributed. We simply don't have a lot of oak up here. So, you know, it kind of depends on where you are, but we see a lot of annual variability in these different food sources, which bears have to deal with that boom bust situation. And as we all know, when natural foods are limited, bears are going to supplement, and they know how to find food. They're attracted to the food that we as a society make available to them. And it's during these poor food periods that we see an increase in complaints, because bears are attracted to these human-related food sources. This shows the kind of the distribution of, this reflects calls for assistance with bears by the public during the different months of the year. And it's no surprise that it peaks during the summer months. I consider the month of June to be kind of the most challenging month for bears in New Hampshire. You know, bears come out of den late March, early April. If it was a good acorn and beech nut year, the fall before, these bears will go back to those areas and take advantage of those nuts, which are still laying on the forest floor. But also in spring, some of the green vegetation that you see growing along wetland edges as well as along forest edges, that is a food source for bears. But what happens eventually as you approach June, that green vegetation becomes just less palatable to bears. It starts to harden off, and it's just not as appealing. So June's kind of that period where there isn't a heck of a lot to eat, and we don't start seeing fruit crops become available much before July. The first crop of fruit that comes out is wild strawberries, and bears certainly eat them, but they tend not to be a major food source. The very small bear has to eat a lot of them in order to get some value. So the first decent crop of fruit tends to be blueberries, followed by raspberries, but that's not really occurring until July. So I kind of attribute this peak in June to the fact that's kind of the leanest month of the year for bears. And then as you move through summer into early fall, if it's a good year, you have various types of fruit crops available to bears, including, you know, blueberries to raspberries to blackberries to apples. And then as you get into the fall months, you can start having some of those nut crops, including hazelnuts, beech nuts, acorns. So we typically see this steep decline from late summer. The other thing that's going on here is you think about, when are people coming to New Hampshire to play and have fun and to go camping and go out to eat at restaurants. We definitely see this peak coincide with a period of time when there's a lot of people in our state. Our state is a tourist attraction for sure, and the summer months are the busiest times of the year for that. So kind of both of those are what kind of drive this.
There's that same here.
This graph it looks more complex than that. The number of complaints on a given year, and it's comparing it to the production score for raspberry. And this is kind of simplifying the diet of black bears during summer, but I do believe that raspberries are one of the most important fruit crops for bears during July and into August. And what we clearly see is a real inverse relationship between the number of complaints and the production of raspberries. So when raspberry production is poor, complaints spike and vice versa. So again, this just to illustrate this relationship between natural foods and conflict levels. Regionally, we see the greatest number of conflicts occurring in our White Mountains region, as well as the central region of the state. Now think back to some of the earlier slides in the presentation. Yes, this is where we have our greatest bear density, but it's also where we have some of our highest human densities during the summer, because of that tourist season. So there's certainly a relationship between the number of bears and the number of conflicts on any given year or in a given area, but I don't believe it's the most driving force. I believe that conflicts are more correlated with human density than they are bear density. And this just kind of shows, what are most of the conflict calls that we're dealing with related to? Well, most of them fall into the general category, and that includes property damage by bears. It includes bears, raiding bird feeders, knocking over garbage cans, those type of things. We do have agricultural related issues with bears. That's more of a fall thing. We do have feeding of bears, which goes on despite it being an illegal activity. But it's really just those general kind of conflicts that really take up the bulk of it. And if you break it out by a cause, it basically comes down to three things: unsecured garbage, which is over half the number of annual complaints, unprotected or poorly housed chickens, and finally bird seed. So despite the messaging from the department for all these years about taking bird feeders down by April 1, the number of complaints related to bears getting into bird feeders is still, the third highest of any of the other types of food attractants. So, if we could address these three categories, we could significantly reduce annual complaints. But the biggie is garbage. It's our waste and how it's stored. New Hampshire is a destination for people want to live in New Hampshire. It's long been recognized as being the New England state with the fastest growing human population, and that is predicted to continue. But none of these numbers reflect the COVID pandemic. And there's no doubt that once COVID hit, we certainly saw this tremendous influx of people into New Hampshire. People wanted to move away from the more densely populated areas, and they wanted to move to New Hampshire, particularly more northern New Hampshire. So, this whole growth in our human population has really been sped up significantly since the COVID pandemic started, and we've certainly seen that play out in terms of bear-human conflicts. And as people move, into this state, they want their Taj Mahal on the side of a mountain. They want to live further away from people, but what they're really doing is they're moving deeper into black bear habitat. So when you have people developing and building houses in these more wooded habitats, it's going to put them in closer proximity to bears. Most people want to, once they move up, people like to see wildlife. They like to see birds during the summer at their bird feeders, and bird feeding is a hobby that really persists. But what's happening is this creates a very high valued food source that bears really key in on. I talked about the lack of high quality foods during late spring, early summer. The diet of a black bear during that period is very much vegetative, including fruits, and fruits high in sugar, high in carbohydrates, but it's not high in fat and protein. And remember, these animals are trying to replenish body fat or start bulking up for the following fall, winter. If given the choice, they're going to go for foods that are high in fat and protein because those really help build body fat. So, bird seed is really high test. It's more nutritionally valuable than even acorns and beech nuts. So you can't have these food sources out there without attracting bears.
Excuse me, Andrew. Do you want the questions at the end or as we're going through?
Let's wait to the end.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I talked about bear feeding. In 2006, we passed a rule that made it illegal to feed bears, and we did that because of a growing trend in the activity. But since 2006, I feel like we've gotten a little better handle on it. But we have shut down a lot of bear feeding sites around the state, and probably the most severe one that I ever dealt with was in the town of Warren, where people had been feeding upwards to 20 bears for over 20 years. So, some of these feed sites can really become long-term things. And I think what happens is, I think it starts with a single bear and people kind of think it's cute, but, if you have one bear, you're going to have more bears. And as these feeding sites continue over time, I think people tend to get in over their head and they don't know how to stop. And we've certainly have seen that in different areas, and including up here in the North Country. But like I said, I think we're getting a better handle on it. But there's another type of feeding that occurs, which is inadvertent feeding. It's not intentional feeding. This bird feeder is not being put out for bears, but it doesn't matter what the intent is. If bears are being attracted to these food sources, it has negative consequences for these animals. Bears have the ability to cause property damage. Their sense of smell is incredible, and if you have garbage that's giving off a lot of odor, it can't be guaranteed that a bear's not going to be able to gain access to a building because of their strength and agility. And so it's really important to store these food attractants in a way that bears can't gain access to it, but also important to think about the odors that these attractants give off, because bears are very determined animals. And we certainly see this type of behavior passed through generations. Females invest a lot of time in cubs. They retain their cubs for 18 months before the family breaks up, and these cubs learn a lot from the female in those 18 months. And when we have these situations where we have adult females that are bringing their cubs into these same type of situations, as you would expect, these cubs quickly develop these same types of behaviors. So it really becomes a snowball effect. And bears spend more time around people. They have higher mortality rates. Bears get hit by motor vehicles at a higher rate. We have certainly seen the number of motor vehicle strikes with bears in New Hampshire increase over time. Last year, I think about 100 bears were killed on New Hampshire roads, and these bears that start to spend an increasing amount of time in human-occupied areas become very prone to this type of mortality. But there's also physiological consequences for bears that start to spend a lot of time in around people in accessing human foods. We're getting an increasing number of reports each year of sows that have 4 cubs, or even had a sighting a few years back where a sow with 5 cubs. But I get a number of reports each year now of sows with 4 cubs. The average litter size for a New Hampshire female bear is 2.7 cubs, so either 2 or 3 cubs. But we get an increasing number of these females with 4. And generally, they are females that are very large, and they're females that spend a lot of time um, gaining access to human foods, because this food is very high in calories. It's high test for these animals, and as a result, they bulk up, their body size gets big, and that increases their reproductive fitness. And bears can just get themselves in awkward situations when they are living this lifestyle. This bear had this plastic jug stuck over its head, and actually we dealt with two different bears in this particular area, both with the same style jug. So something was going on here where these bears were being attracted to some place that was providing food, and these bears were getting these stuck on their head. And in these situations, we were able to get there in time, but obviously not ideal for the bear. So I'd like to talk a little bit about, what we're trying to do to deal with these situations, what we're trying to do to reduce annual bear-human conflicts and increase that level of appreciation and awareness and tolerance for bears in New Hampshire. We get a lot of these phone calls each summer, people that are having a bear in their yard, seeing a bear in their yard, or having a conflict with a bear. They want us to come and trap and move it. They think it's our responsibility. But the reality of it is we're moving further away from trap and translocation of bears. I don't feel like we ever did a lot of it in New Hampshire, but we're doing a lot less of it now. And, experience has shown us that it's simply not an effective way to resolve these issues. Bears have strong fidelity to their home ranges. They really have the ability to navigate their way back, and this was illustrated with a very somewhat famous bear from Hanover, New Hampshire, a few years ago. This bear was moved from Hanover to Pittsburgh, New Hampshire, and in a little over a year's time, this bear found its way back. So, moving bears around the landscape really is not a viable way to resolve these issues for those reasons that I mentioned. We have a unique relationship with a federal agency in New Hampshire, and that's USDA Wildlife Services. We've been a partner since the mid-'80s on a bear-human conflict management program, and because of that, we're able to provide a lot of resources to folks having issues with bears, and it's been a very successful program for us. And also, there's another initiative that began in the Southeast United States, and that was a bear awareness program that started probably 10 plus years ago, called Bear Wise, and that program has expanded from the Southeast and now is becoming a nationwide program. And New Hampshire Fish and Game joined Bear Wise last summer, so we're excited about that, and that brings a lot more resources to our program. But the intent of the goals of these programs are to provide education and awareness to people regarding bears and living in bear habitat, provide technical assistance, promote what we consider long-term lasting solutions, and to promote coexistence. As far as bear conflict response, we provide a lot of technical assistance to folks in New Hampshire having issues with bears. I mentioned the partnership with USDA. New Hampshire Fish and Game also hires seasonal staff during the summer, during those peak complaint months. We hire additional staff in order to help resolve these issues and to provide education and awareness to people. So, looking at data from last year, you can get a sense of who's out there educating the public about bears and providing this technical assistance. And it's primarily biologists from New Hampshire Fish and Game, as well as biologists and bear technicians from USDA Wildlife Services. We invest a lot of resources into our education program. We've had various types of education pamphlets that we've distributed over time. These are still very, kind of our first line of defense. Obviously a more educated public is going to be more able to make good decisions. But we're really just trying to promote awareness, responsibility, and tolerance. If you live in bear country, all that really means is you have to be a little more proactive. You have to think about where you leave your garbage. You have to give pause to putting bird feeders out or feeding wildlife. You just have to do things a little bit differently in order to avoid conflicts. Of our education program and our conflict abatement program, one of the probably the most popular aspects of that is the technical assistance component. We are able to provide people with equipment, and we loan a lot of equipment out to folks having issues with bears. And the intent here is, we can't fence every chicken coop in the state or every dumpster. We just can't do it. But what we can do is loan this equipment out to folks. Generally, these are considered a short-term loan. It might be 2 weeks. It might be a month, depending on need and demand. But what we're doing is we're loaning people the equipment that we know works, and we're trying to change people's. We're trying to, promote people to be more willing to make these type of investments on their own. A lot of people are hesitant to spend money, but if you can demonstrate that these tools work, we can get some buy-in that way. So our most popular piece of equipment to loan out is definitely electric fences, but we also loan motion activated alarms, as well as a limited number of bear resistant garbage cans. So this is looking at data from 2022. We loaned out 76 electric fences. This just gives you an idea of how we respond to these complaints. Certainly printed literature goes a long way and is most readily available, but we are loaning and setting up a lot of electric fences for people. So because unsecured garbage is such a significant contributor to annual complaints, it's worth taking a minute to kind of focus on that a little more. And there is a lot of garbage made available to bears and other wildlife in our state. Most of the dumpsters you see are not metal top. Most of them are plastic top. Some of you may recognize this location, but you can drive down the street and take a guess where you're going to have a bear issue, because they all have a few things in common. The garbage is not properly stored. The dumpsters have plastic tops rather than metal tops. They're not properly latched, and they become real easy targets for bears. So we promote the use of metal top dumpsters. That sometimes is easier said than done. It's unfortunately some of these waste management companies don't make it particularly easy to request and obtain a metal top dumpster. There can be quite a process to go through, but it's all persistence. The squeaky wheel does occasionally get the grease. So we really encourage folks to put the pressure to their dumpster company and demand a metal top. And remember, there's more than one dumpster company out there. So, shop around and try to get what you need. There are some options for smaller containers. There's a Presby Steel started in Berlin, New Hampshire, started making some smaller metal containers. There are multiple manufacturers in other parts of the country that are producing some of these containers, and they work great. The problem is some of these do come with a price tag, and that can be a real hurdle for a lot of people. And there's always a human element. You can put the best equipment on the landscape, and do everything right. But if people simply aren't willing to take the time to do what's necessary on their end, your efforts can fail. This is a dumpster that really would be perfectly fine, but you got to close and latch doors. And unfortunately, it's not uncommon for us to loan equipment to people that simply don't value the equipment or properly use the equipment. We go through a lot of effort getting these electric fences distributed around the state, putting these electric fences up. And it's not uncommon to go back to pick the equipment up, and this is what it can look like. And it just speaks to what the issue is. You're dealing with a segment of society that simply refuses to help themselves. And that is the most challenging aspect of managing conflicts between bears and people. I'm seeing less of these on the landscape, thankfully, but there was a period of time where the plywood full of rusty nails was thought to be a good idea. It's not, and it's completely ineffective. So I talked about the manufactured bear-proof containers. They're very nice and they do work, but unfortunately they do come with a price tag. There are other options. If you're clever with a drill and willing to go to the local hardware store and buy some modestly priced hardware, you can take your typical plastic garbage can, and I don't know if I'd quite call it bear proof, but I think I would call it bear resistant. You can take some steps on your own to try to keep animals from getting into some of these. Can a really determined bear get into this garbage can? Absolutely, but there's a lot of bears that will quickly give up and move on to the next thing. So there's some effort that can be taken. There's also these screw-on top style bear-proof cans that are less expensive. The problem is they're a little more. They're not as convenient as some of the more expensive options, but options are out there. Chickens have also become a tremendous issue for us as managers. An increasing number of people are raising chickens in their backyard. People like the thought of raising their own birds for their own eggs. They know where their food is coming from, and I appreciate that. The problem is so many of these chicken coops are simply not adequately designed in order to keep bears out. We really recommend the use of electric fence in order to protect chickens. So we just see most of the coops we run into when we're called about a bear issue simply are inadequate. And chicken bear complaints have done over time. It's been a pretty tremendous increase since the mid 2000s to now. So chicken issues really consume a lot of our resources, and unfortunately a lot of people are choosing to protect chickens lethally, and it's really unfortunate because there's better ways to go about it. An increasing number of female bears are shot at chicken coops during the summer, and it has become one of the most contributing sources of orphan cubs. So we're trying to get people to think differently, to respond differently, and to think more proactively and make investments. I can't say enough positive things about electric fence. They're not a tremendous cost, and this equipment tends to last a long period of time. If it's the equipment that we're loaning out, and we're routinely setting it up, picking it up, moving it, setting it up. Most of this equipment, we've been using it for 10 plus years. This stuff, if taken care of, has longevity. Again, if you look at the cost over the life of the product, it's really not a huge investment. And there's a lot of different options on the type of fence that you use, and they're all effective. I'm going to try to play this video for you. So that's all it takes. reason electric fence works on bears is because bears test everything with their nose or their mouth. You know, they're not the type of creature to just crash through things. They're curious and they want to know what things are, and they use their mouth and nose to determine that. And that's why electricity is effective on bears. There was a time when we dealt with a fair amount of issues with bears getting into beehives. But our beekeepers in the state of New Hampshire they're well organized and they're educated. You know, most of the different bee clubs offer beekeeping schools, and just through word of mouth as well as through presentations that we've given at these groups, most beekeepers know that they need electric fence in order to protect their bees. So I didn't even include the slide of bear bee complaints each year into this presentation because it's really become pretty low and very manageable. And that's where we need our chicken owners. We need to get them to that level. So, you know, there's all kinds of different energizers and electric fence styles depending on your needs. There's solar chargers, there's battery powered energizers, plug-ins. So, you know, if you think an electric fence would be helpful, feel free to reach out, and there's lots of options. I haven't dealt with many situations that needed a fence where we couldn't find some type of a setup that worked effectively. But there's a lot people can do for themselves. You know, don't put bird feeders out during spring and summer and fall. You know, keep your bird feeding to solely a winter activity. Think about, you know, trying to modify your plastic garbage can to make it a little more bear resistant. Think back early in the presentation where that bear broke through the wooden door on that outbuilding. You know, that's because that bear could smell that garbage. So think about controlling odor. You know, we recommend and put it in an outbuilding or your garage or whatever. If your garbage is getting a little stinky, get some ammonia, lay a rag in on top of the garbage, soak that rag with ammonia, then put the cap on. You know, just little steps like that can go a long way in preventing a bear from discovering that attractant. You know, a lot of these tools that we loan out are readily available. You know, these motion activated alarms, unfortunately, they've gone up in price because they've proven to be so effective on deterring bears, but you know, they're available. They're made by Critter Getter. Pyrotechnic pistols, you can get your hands on those. A pressurized air horn that you buy at I think Walmart probably carries them, but a boating store, a store that sells boating equipment would have it. So point being is, when a bear comes into your yard, it's waiting to be told that it's unwelcome. You know, so many people just, you know, hide in their house or take photos or don't make it a negative experience for the bear. So, you know, do whatever you can within your comfort zone. You know, yell at the bear, make noise, bang pots and pans, you know, throw rocks and sticks at the bear. You know, the bear's waiting to be told that it's unwelcome and to leave. And we have to do that. Otherwise, over time, they just become increasingly comfortable in roaming into these areas. And there's lots of things that you can do as a community. And thankfully, Bethlehem is one of those towns that have done just that. But, you know, we have several towns in New Hampshire that have passed town ordinances that dictate how you store. Most of these ordinances are directed solely at garbage storage, which again is huge because it's the most contributing cause of bear-human conflicts. But, you know, as a community, you can take these efforts upon yourself to, you know, establish some criteria in these towns on how you want to see garbage stored. as a means to reduce conflicts. But these ordinances are only as good as enforcement. You have to have a police department that's willing to enforce these ordinances in order to have them be effective. I've had pretty good luck in more recent years contacting the state health department, or more specifically, some of these town health officers. I've been able to use these folks to address some pretty nasty dumpsters at restaurants, and they've been very helpful. So, kind of thinking outside the box about ways you can put increasing pressure on some of these habitual offenders. And, what this state needs is a dumpster law, a statewide law that would require metal top dumpsters would essentially eliminate the vast majority of our annual bear human conflicts. This is not an easy hurdle. But start talking to your elected officials about planting the seed for a way for us to do a better job managing our waste. But there's garbage is everywhere, and it really it just has the ability to perpetuate annual bear human conflicts. And you can have everybody on the street doing the right thing and being proactive, but it only takes one person to be consistently leaving that garbage out to result in bear issues for everybody. And there's always going to be failures along the way. We need to constantly be keeping an eye out and be willing to speak up and address those situations when we see them. So I'm just going to finish by talking about some of you may have heard about, all the orphan cubs we responded to this year, and it's actually the second time in about 5 years that this has happened. And there's a lot of mixed feelings on whether or not we as an agency should be doing this, but I'm going to give you my 2 cents. The situation that creates this is unique, and it happens occasionally when we have a really abundant food year, which causes high reproductive success in bears, which is then followed by a complete mast failure, meaning there's absolutely, summer berry crops don't produce, hard mass in the fall doesn't produce. We saw this back in 2018 to 19, and we saw it again this past year. So what's happening is you're getting a lot of female bears are producing cubs, and then all of a sudden the bottom's falling out, and there's no food available, and these bears become highly vulnerable to different sources of mortality. And I think it's important that we talk about what these mortality factors are. Some of them are certainly bears getting struck by motor vehicles. When food is limited, bears travel wider areas, longer distances, and they get hit by cars. That's certainly a part of it. Another part of it is people that are shooting bears due to conflicts. I talked about bears being shot at chicken coops. But we can't ignore the fact that we also need to start trying to educate our hunting public a little better. A significant number of these orphan cubs is a result of hunting, and hunting of black bears is critical to maintaining our population of bears in the state. But we need to start doing a better job of trying to educate hunters on the need to be more selective and to make better decisions. And it's controversial. There's a lot of people out there that don't think we should be responding to these cubs. But I'm here to tell you that we as an agency are not in a position where we're going to ignore phone calls day after day of these 10 and 20 pound cubs that are in people's yards and starving to death. We don't think that's good for the bear program. We don't think that's good for the image of black bears in Hampshire, and we don't think we will garner a lot of public support and credibility. So, we're fortunate in New Hampshire that we have the ability to bring these cubs to a rehabilitator. That rehabilitator is located in Lyme, New Hampshire. His name is Ben Killam, and we've had good luck over the years rehabilitating these cubs, which will be released the following spring. And we've rehabilitated and released over 300 cubs in the state of New Hampshire over the last 20 or so years. And again, our preference would be to not have to rehabilitate any cubs. We'd rather see these cubs raised by the sows. But as we see increased mortality on these sows at certain times, it has caused us to kind of step in and intervene. And whether the ability of a cub to survive once it's orphaned depends on a lot of things. It depends on food conditions in any given year, depends on the size of the cub. So it's not always a guaranteed death sentence, but on these very poor food years where these cubs are weighing 10, 15, 20 pounds in the fall rather than 30, 35 pounds, those are the cubs that will likely not survive without some intervention. So I'm gonna just end by making a plea to keep New Hampshire's black bears wild. Be proactive, clean up, lock up, be responsible, and learn to coexist with bears. So I'm gonna get out of this and come back to the presentation.
I'm gonna start asking the questions, Andrew, because it's already quarter after.
Yep.
The first one is from William. Is landowner permission required to bait or track bears?
Yeah. So was it bait or trap?
Track.
Oh, track. Okay. So yes, if you are placing bait on somebody's property other than your own, you require landowner permission. You actually have to get a baiting permit. As far as pursuing a bear on somebody's property, if the property is not posted, it's just like hunting any species. The kind of the way it's done in the Northeast is you have the right to go on that property if it's not posted. But baiting absolutely requires landowner permission and a signed permit.
William also asked, how is global warming impact bear hibernation?
So we're certainly seeing, in these more mild years, we are definitely seeing the period of time when bears are inactive decreasing, but that's also dependent on food abundance. The primary reason bears den is to deal with periods of food abundance more so than adverse weather. So if you have a really good food year, it's not uncommon to see bears active into December or even January, whereas a year like this with very poor food, most bears were den by November. So both food and weather impacted, but ultimately, a shortening winter and a warmer winter is probably going to reduce the length of time that bears are hibernating.
Barbara asked, is it still true that embryos won't implant in a low mast year?
Yeah, so bears breed in late spring, early summer, May through July. That egg is fertilized at that time, but then that egg is floating around in the uterus until November. So it does not implant to the uterine wall until November. And that's a bear's way of dealing with kind of these fluctuating food sources. So come November, if that bear is not put on adequate body fat at a physical point where it can support fetal development, that's the bear's mechanism of the that blastocyst doesn't implant, and then that's the end of it. So that is kind of a mechanism that bears use to deal with periods of poor mast.
Brian asked, how much of the garbage category is commercial garbage versus residential garbage?
I don't know that off the top of my head. If I was to take a guess, I would guess it's probably 50-50, to be honest with you.
Peter asked, are the basically dying beach is going to affect bears?
Yeah, we're worried about the status of American beach. You know, so much of our beach has beach bark disease and is declining. Um, Beach also is not a highly valued species by foresters, so we tend to see it kind of targeted for removal during timber operations. So, you know, beach is facing some issues for sure. So yes, it is a concern, and the loss of beach would be the loss of a very important fall mast. Even with its inconsistent crop, in those years when it produces good, every critter in the woods is targeting it.
John asked, is hunting the best management tool to control bear populations, or are there other alternatives?
Well, I think it is, as far as, you know, you need some removal in order to keep that population growth rate controllable. But in addition to that, equally important is controlling the amount of human-related food that these bears are getting access to. You know, there's no doubt in my mind that that's a contributing factor to what we've seen in bear population growth. So I think they both can be important.
Peter asks, unlike deer, bear hunting can be either sex if they reproduce every other year. Is that a potential concern?
So I think what he's asking is the whole issue of shooting females with cubs. It can be a concern, and that's kind of what I was touching on. But really, you can avoid shooting females with cubs if the hunter simply takes a little more time to observe the bear. You know, in springtime, sows will put cubs up a tree and then go and feed, but by fall, those cubs are on her heels 24/7. So it can be done, and we're going to develop a educational video that we're going to ask bear hunters to review before purchasing a license, and we hope to get, what our plan is to try to just get into the education on identifying bear family groups and you know, not targeting them for harvest.
John asked, in our southern part of the state with lower snow totals and warmer winters, are bears actually hibernating as in decades past?
They are, but it's reduced down there. You know, bears are actually starting to get active now down there. Whereas up here, I still think we have a few weeks. And actually, in that part of the state, we're kind of changing our recommended bird feeding period to ending March 15th rather than April 1 because of that exact reason. You know, winter lets up a lot earlier down there, and we tend to see bears get active 2 to 3 weeks earlier in the southern part of the state compared to the more northern.
Brian has a two-part question. Does the state incentivize people and businesses to use the correct type of trash containers? And can people be fined for shooting sows if they haven't called the Fish and Game at least once?
So the first part of that question, we really have not come up with any way yet to incentivize folks. Particularly, I'm talking about financial incentives. You know, some states have cost share programs, those type of things. We frankly just don't have the financial resource to do that, but we're always exploring ways to try to increase the incentive. As far as the second question, I assume he means that shooting a bear due to conflict without contacting the state. The state law allows you to protect your property from bear damage. So the state law, just like it allows you to shoot about any animal due to damage. So state law allows it. You have to prove damage, but irregardless, you know, I'm here to ask people to give us a call. Let us help you mitigate that issue with non-lethal means. We have a lot of staff dedicated to those efforts, and we're here to help.
And then Lynn asks, is compost considered feeding? I have heard of people that do this and bears get into their compost.
Yeah, you know, compost is one of those things where historically it was a non-issue. It's becoming a bit more of an issue, but I feel like compost rarely is the main attractant. I feel like there's other more valuable attractants that first bring the bear into the area. And then once it's there, it gets into compost more so than it being the major attractant. So the best I can say is to, compost responsibly and so to try to reduce that odor and try to reduce actual food that's in the compost. And hopefully it doesn't become a major food attractant, because that would be unfortunate, because composting is it's a good thing to do, and it would be unfortunate if it starts becoming a major attractant for bears.
And that's all the questions that are in there. And Veronica just posted a link regarding baitings to everyone in the chat.
Well, thank you, Andrew, so much for your info. And as somebody who lives in Bethlehem with our ordinance and also manages to compost without getting my bears in compost, I always remember the tip that I was told was that you put things in compost, not on top of the compost pile.
Right.
And that's how that if you do that and you use adequate cover, we must have 4 or 5 bears that come through our yard when they're awake. And they don't tear apart our compost bin in the slightest. But if we put our garbage bin out before they have come through the yard, they will absolutely tear into that thing.
Right.
So
Right.
we so far so good. But
Good.
So if nobody else has any other questions, thank you all so much for coming to tonight's presentation. And I hope to see you all, if not at Bretzfelder, at other Forest Society events. And thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
I'm going to stop the recording
Thank
now.
you.